A little bit. Yes. Hi, I'm Gidon Ariel at Root Source, and I'm here with my friend Dr. Philip Steele. I got that right?
That's right, Philip Earl Steele. Right.
Philip Earl, the Duke of Earl.
There are several Philip Earls. There's one in Britain who also writes on history, Philip Steele. So I've always made a point of using the middle name, Philip Earl, just to
Okay.
distinguish me.
When,
Yeah.
when the when the internet first came out, I found there was another Gidon Ariel, some sports doctor or something like that, but I've never met him. But
Okay.
nobody has mistaken me for him until now. Yeah, so did we meet before I was in the United States?
That's right. Right. Yeah. I hope you had a good trip. You're
I
rolling
had,
your eyes.
yeah, well, first of all, I'm very tired. I had a tough night. It was very hot last night. I didn't get much sleep.
Uh,
But the trip was a long, also busy trip. I started in for a couple of days in Dallas, and then I went for a few days to Denver, and then from there, I think it was a few days to Chicago, and then from there I went to New York, and then from there to Panama. Each time for like 1 to 3 days,
a
and then
whirlwind tour.
exactly. Then I finished up in Florida with my sister. So
Okay.
I'm right now I'm feeling tired, so I'm figuring, oh, it's because of that trip. No, I think I've already overcome the jet lag of that trip.
Okay.
And what have you been doing in all that time?
Well, as regards our exchange, I made that trip to Berlin and made a lecture regarding early Zionism at Turo's affiliate there in Berlin, Turo University. So that was fun. I took my 7-year-old son with me. He's been tagging along on many of my recent lectures. He's big enough now that he can behave himself. He has a coloring book, of course, crayons, but yeah. So we had some, father-son fun, building memories.
That's amazing that a 7-year-old kid sits in an academic university lecture.
Yeah, yeah.
So
He's a smart one. He gets it from his mom.
very nice. Okay, so again, I apologize. I'm a little bit out of it today. Am I going to ask you questions? You're going to ask me questions today.
Oh no, no, no! You're the question asker.
Okay. All right. So when we last met our hero, you had moved to Poland. That's where, did I get that right?
Yeah, I think we covered my whole biography last time. Yeah.
So then what is and now you are moving forward on doing more and more um research about Herzl and pre-Herzlian, is that the right way to say it? Zionism. Did I get that right?
Yeah, yeah, I'm sticking to my guns. So I'm focusing on the 19th century, right? That's where all the fun is.
It's really amazing because from my perspective as an religious Zionist, I guess you could say that. Um, we think of the in general terms, we think of the exile between the destruction of the Second Temple and pretty much Herzl as all. I can't even believe I'm saying this as one big block of exile, but that's obviously not true. I actually once heard a lecture by none other than Netanyahu, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He was
He's an expert.
between he was between stints as prime minister, I think. I don't think he had been prime minister yet. And all of a sudden, he showed up at an event. We had maybe about 100 people there, and we weren't expecting him, but he showed up and he started. It was a Zionist event, and he started teaching Zionism. How that the Jew, despite conventional wisdom, that all of the Jews left the land of Israel about 2,000 years ago, and then all of a sudden came back in the first Aliyah, And the first Aliyah, that was what, in the 1880s or in the early 1880s? But that it barely counted. The real Aliyah for modern Israel is when Tel Aviv was founded in 1919 or something like that. Which and even I think that I only would think about the first Aliyah and the fifth Aliyah because I went to a Zionist camp, summer camp, and so they had to do something to make it a little educational. So they taught us a little about the five Aliyot before
Mhm.
the state of Israel was founded. But of course, Netanyahu taught us how no, there's always been a Jewish community in the land of Israel all this time.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah,
So
he is a fine historian after all, and as you know better than I do, he's the son of a historian and the
mhm.
grandson of an early Zionist activist from Warsaw. In fact, where I'm speaking, right? I mean, Natan Milejkowski, who was Ben Sion's father, spent much of his Zionist career right here in Warsaw, also in Łódź, Lodz. Yeah, so he's got roots right here is in the Zionist movement.
So I know a little bit about Ben Sion Netanyahu. That's Prime Minister Netanyahu's father. Don't think I ever met him, but I did come and can to the Shiva, to the House of Consolation when he passed away. Netanyahu sat, as is Jewish tradition, for 7 days, and people came to visit him. So I somehow managed to squeeze in there.
Well, good for you.
Um, but besides knowing that name, Milikovsky, if I didn't pronounce it, if I got that right,
In
could you
Polish, it
tell
looks like Milejkowski.
Milikovsky? So tell me a little bit about him. What do you know about Netanyahu's grandfather?
I don't know a terrible lot, in fact. I know that he wasn't um, from Warsaw, but he came here once he'd started this chapter of his life as a traveling Zionist activist lecturer. And I think all of this would have to be double checked, but prior to World War One, he spent 5 or 6 years here in Warsaw before moving on to Łódź. But Ben Sion was born in Warsaw during that time.
And again, Ben Sion's father was what was his name?
Natan
Natan. Yes, yes,
Milejkowski.
yes, yes.
Yeah, right.
So did Natan never move to Israel?
Uh,
I'm putting you on the
yeah,
spot.
yeah. I'm afraid I don't know his biography well enough. He may well have, but I can't recall. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do our homework, maybe. Um, so then what are you focusing on now? I'll ask you questions that you know the answer to.
Right. Yeah. Well, as I mentioned last time, we're doing this series of five so far works on early Zionism. Mine was the first in the series, the one on Herzl. The second one is Drishat Zion, right?
Oh,
The classical work from 1862 by Rabbi Kalischer from Torun here in Poland. We'll next do a volume where we'll publish the original protocols from the conference in Katowice, right? The very first significant, I stress that word, significant international Zionist conference happened in Katowice in 1884 in November. So in fact, we've got the 140th anniversary coming up right away. But we're going to be
just
publishing
one
the
second. Just 1884 and the famous first Zionist Congress in
Basel was
Basel was in 1897.
exactly. Yeah. So this was the 13
15
years
years.
earlier. And there were actually many international Zionist meetings, conferences. That's the word used about Katowice, and then of course the congresses. But the very first large scale such international meeting conference was the one organized by Hoveve Zion
Oh,
uh,
let's see.
in 1884, held in Katowice. So the protocols were published, in fact, within a month in December already of 1884. The protocols published in both Hebrew and in German. So we're going to include both of those and translate it. It's not a lot of material, in fact, about 20 pages, but we'll translate that into both Polish and English. I'll give it a nice big fat introduction of 30 or 40 pages. And so that'll finally be out there. And it's like the case of Drishat Zion, in fact, that these protocols have never been published in full in Polish or in English. So.
And so you're saying Drishat Zion was never published in English?
Not in full, yeah. There are fragments in Herzberg, right? The Zionist idea and so forth. But
Wow. And now you're going to publish it in English?
yeah, that's the upcoming volume. We're just about ready to publish that.
Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. And as far as Katowice was concerned, 15 years before Herzl's Great Congress,
13.
was the difference between them, pardon for being a little bit cynical, PR? In other words, the Herzl had better PR than the people at Katowice.
Yeah, there are real striking parallels between the two events. I mean, Leon Pinsker wrote, Auto Emancipation in 1882, and it was, around all of the attention that work received that the Congress was, or the conference rather, was organized. So it's a little bit like how, first came Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, Herzl's classic work, 1896, and then a year and 4 months, 5 months later, the first Congress was held. So there is a certain similarity there. But
And
yeah,
and just one second, when was the the Dreyfus trial? What year was that?
that began in December 1894. Yeah, and he was oh God, what's the word? Demoted and cast out, his sword
Yes,
broken.
yes, yes, yes.
All
The
of that
Dreyfus.
was, yeah, that was in January of 1895, the month later. Yeah,
And
and
the
Herzl was
again,
there.
the Zionist myth or story is that Herzl was there. He was covering it for a Viennese newspaper, Die Welt, I believe.
No, Neue Freie Presse.
Neue Freie Press, yes. I dare to guess and sometimes I get it wrong. And he saw that the crowd was not screaming death to the traitor, but death to the Jews. And he was astounded by that, and that turned him to try to find a solution to the problem of anti-Semitism. And he came up again. I'm saying what most people might think, came up with the idea of Zionism. Yet there had been Katowice Zionism for 15 years before. Was there a follow-up conference after that conference in
There were
18?
several. The most important was held in Warsaw. Another was held on the border between today's Poland and Lithuania. So there was follow up. There was also kind of fractions developed. In fact, I must say, Gidon, trace your roots. We mentioned this last time we spoke, through the Merkaz Rouhani of religious Zionism. It was Mohilever who was the co-chairman, together with Pinsker, of the Hofefe Zionist movement, who first created Merkaz Rouhani. In one of these conferences, this would have been 1890 or 1892. And of course, Rabbi Renes was there, Yitzhak Renes.
We pronounce it Rhinus.
Reines, right. Okay, right.
So wait a
And
second. So Rabbi Rhinus was part of that Katowice movement, if you will.
he was, although by the 1890s, the early 1890s, when Merkaz Rouhani was formed, there had been
Mizrahi.
right, the Mizrahi movement, right? There was already a kind of a split, right? I mean, Pinsker, like Herzl, once again we have a parallel, was a very secularized Jew, right? I mean, his contact with the Torah and Jewish learning and all of that was very, very weak. A lot like modern Reformed American Jews might be, right? It was kind of tangential. But that created some tensions after all,
between the religious and the non-religious.
yeah, and so they started to build up their own infrastructure, as it were. And it was in that context that Mizrahi, right? I don't know that that acronym was used then. I think they were still calling it Merkas Rouhani, but that's when that was first created on the Lithuanian, modern Lithuanian Polish border.
What did these people and their plan, and did they already use the word Zionism, which I believe was coined by a man by the name of Nathan Birnbaum?
Right. Yeah. Just a couple of years, or even just 1 year prior. In his Zionist periodical Selbst-Emanzipation, right, which he took that name from Pinska's work, Auto-Emancipation. But yeah, he coined in the spring of 1890. He coined first the word Zionist, and then Zionism about 6 weeks later. So yeah.
Wow. And the definition, Birnbaum's definition of Zionism was the movement to establish a Jewish state in the land of Israel.
Yeah. I mean, it was the latest form of Hoveret Zion, of Ahavat Zion, Hibat Zion. I mean, there are all these various terms being used. The most popular, however, in the 19th century, both among Jews and Christians, was restorationism, right? In the various European languages, including English, of course. The Jewish Chronicle was a newspaper, the largest at the time, in fact, Jewish newspaper, and it had a strong Zionist bent already beginning in the 1850s. You can find articles that are promoting the idea of returning to the land. And the word you see there in the Jewish Chronicle, from London, after all, is restorationism most often.
Wow. So when who coined that word?
I don't know. I think that one had floated around forever. The whole idea of restoring the kingdom of Israel and everything. So
Wow. Amazing. And of course, like you just mentioned, I believe Christians were excited about that and talking about it.
yeah, it's really the latest focus of my work is on this cross pollination between Jewish Zionists and Christian Zionists, and it's a topic that rivets lots of scholars. The doyen for many people of Zionist scholars is Anita Shapira in Tel Aviv, and she stresses in her work, describing the origins of Zionism, that the idea itself as a real program, not simply a yearning or a passive wish, so to speak, but as an idea that is to gain legs and feet. That's, in
Yes.
fact, I'm speaking Polish, but that's how we say it here. But to put flesh on the idea and actually bring it about, that arose with English evangelical Christians, and from there spread to Jewish Zionists. And the chronology bears that out. I mean, some of the earliest um, promoters of the Zionist idea were these evangelicals, beginning right after the Napoleonic Wars. So there's the Scotsman Robert Haldane, for instance, who's
Robert what?
Haldane. It's Haldane, and yeah, he was preaching on the basis of Paul's letter to the Romans. That includes the famous passages showing that the covenant remains valid with the Jews and so forth. It's the basis of, the Vatican II's reconciliation with Judaism and so forth. But
And
yeah,
and virtually all of the Christian Zionists that I'm friends with.
yeah, of course, yeah. Well, yeah, the idea
Romans 9 through 11, if I'm not mistaken.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so he was writing book-length works, for that matter, and preaching and teaching these topics. And it's really interesting story that Haldane would have been 1818 or 1819, right in that period, directly after the Napoleonic Wars. Went to the continent. He went to France, and he was directed to Geneva. Right, that, oh, here you're going to find a group of young men who are going to be willing to study with you. this whole aspect of Romans 9 to 11, the idea that the covenant remains valid with the Jews. What's the place of the Jews in in uh, in God's plan, and especially in God's plan for the future? And he did have it precisely that kind of luck. In fact, Haldane, a Scotsman, I repeat, is the principal figure behind what's called the Swiss revival in the 1820s and 30s. There was kind of an awakening, like we'd say, in an early American context, that took place in French-speaking Switzerland. And again, the father figure of this revival was Haldane. And I mentioned with you before Henri Dunant, the founder of the Red Cross. That's usually how we remember him. Dunant, in fact, derives from this group, from this revival, this Protestant revival that was focused on a Zionism, in fact. And this is where his own Zionist career found its roots.
So you think that Robert Haldane simply read the Bible and came up with the idea of restoration? He was the first one?
Well, no, it goes back, to early Christianity, although it was soon forgotten, right? But with the Protestant Reformation, especially in its Calvin being from Geneva, by the way, but in its Calvinist version, that whole idea of restorationism became very strong, but it didn't turn into
Which Calvin are we talking about here?
John Calvin, the father of the large segment of the Protestant world, Calvinism. The Presbyterians and the Baptists, they're seminaries. They study the institutes of Calvin, right? So he's
excuse my absence of clarity on this. I again make it very simple that there were Catholics, and then all of a sudden Martin Luther came around. So and he created Protestantism, but Calvin, he was after Luther.
Yeah, Calvin was roughly a generation younger than Luther, but he's not the first figure then among the Protestant reformers, but he's obviously the greater. I mean, Lutheranism has always been essentially limited to the Germanic countries, right? To Germany itself and to Scandinavia, right? Calvinism is the version of Protestantism that spread all over the world, right? To North America and everywhere else where it's gone. I mean, even the evangelicals themselves, especially in the form of the Baptists, trace themselves directly back to Calvin and study his classic works, the Institutes, as they're called.
And so proto-Christian Zionism, if I may use that phrase, that started with Calvin himself?
Yeah, in fact, yeah. At that time, Catholic saints were being rejected and being replaced with the Hebrew prophets and figures from the Hebrew Bible. It's one of the many reasons why, there are all these Hebrew names among evangelical Christians, right? All the Joshuas and the Ruths and the
Zechariah and Zebediah.
Yeah, it has to do with a kind of replacement that happened very early on within Calvinism. Catholic saints being rejected. After all, here I am in Poland. Everybody in this country, has a saint's name nearly, right? From the Catholic pantheon, let's call it. But,
Interesting.
yeah. In the case of the evangelical Protestants who trace themselves above all to Calvin, right? They were borrowing the Jewish names.
Wow. And Calvin, he was active around what year?
Yeah, this is 16th century, right? I mean, just right after Luther. I mean, Luther nailed his famous 95 Theses at Wittenberg in 1517. And
I'm sorry, 15 what?
17.
1517.
Right. And Calvin was already an important, prominent figure in the 1530s.
1530s. Wow. I learn a lot. I learn a lot. We the way that we learn Torah is through the Talmud and the commentaries, and it all seems to be a big jumble. It's if all of the scholars, almost from the time of Moses till today, are all in the same study hall, no matter what century they lived in. So when I think of 1530, I think you said, when Calvin was around.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm fascinated to wonder who were the active scholars that I would study today in those times. Yeah, I'd have to look it up to try to guess, and then to wonder, apropos what you were saying, what you're doing, what did Calvin meet any Jews, and did he meet any famous Jews? When I say famous, I mean, did he meet any Jews that we study their works today?
Well, among the heretical Jews, I mean, Spinoza would have been in the next century. So no, but those two men didn't meet. But
So
back to an area.
Spinoza, again, so Spinoza has the name of being the first heretic. Up until then, everybody with toe in the line, and all of a sudden, Benedict Spinoza broke all the vessels. But that was 100 years after Calvin, you're saying.
Right. That was the next century. Yeah. But the area I know better, because here, it's all very rough in fact. But the area I know better is where Britain's power now, ever so expanded following the defeat of Napoleonic France, allows this idea that's been strong already for a couple of centuries to then, become a reality, right? And in this regard, right, with the Ottoman Empire contracting and losing ground. I mean, at the same time, in the early 1820s, that's when Greek independence takes place, right? From, of course, Ottoman Turkey.
Greece got their independence from whom?
From Ottoman Turkey.
From Ottoman Turkey in the early 1800s?
In the early 1820s, yeah. So the dynamic here of where Zionism starts to become something with tooth and nail, right, is when the British power is expanding, and within that whole British culture is the Zionist idea, and the Turkic Empire is contracting. Just a couple of years after Greece had established itself as an independent country, Serbia did. Also having liberated itself from Ottoman rule. In the 1830s, just a couple of years later, once again, the leader of Egypt, he had kind of a governor sort of a role vis-a-vis the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Mehmet Ali uprose and took the whole Levant, including all of today's modern Israel, after all. And it was at this time, with the Turkic Empire having lost its hold in Levant, in the Holy Land, that Britain finally then stepped in. And the first way it did so was
wait. What year about you're talking about?
Talking about the 1830s. That's when Mehmet Ali took all of the Levant. And it was in 1839 that Britain established itself in Jerusalem with a new consulate, right? There'd been no such presence there, right? And just 2 years later, in 1841, Britain and Prussia, right? There wasn't yet a unified Germany in 1841, but Britain and Prussia established a unified Anglican Lutheran bishopric, right? The first of its kind in Jerusalem.
Sure.
In fact, it's Christchurch. Right. Yeah. Right there when you enter. So,
but this is amazing, because I would have guessed that you're talking
from
about.
the
I would have guessed that you're talking about the 1910s when the Ottoman Empire crashed and burned and died, basically. So
yeah,
to say that it was
Turkey
actually going downhill from the 1820s, like 100 years of going down, and Britain was already coming up in the 1820s, because we always thought, again, evidently it's not as simple as I would say, that there were a few Zionists, amongst them, of course, the Jewish Chaim Weizmann, ultimately the president of Israel, and a few pro Christian Zionists that came to Balfour and said, "Come on, give us Israel." And that was in 1917 or whenever that was,
Right,
like
right, right.
17. And up until then, nobody cared, nobody thought about it. And it was just like on a whim almost that the people who were carving up the Ottoman Empire, Sykes-Picot, I might be off by a decade or so,
No,
that
no.
hey, let's give the Jews the land of Israel. But you're saying that that actually started more than 100 years earlier
Yeah, we're roughly a century earlier, right? I mean, the Ottoman Empire was the so-called sick man of Europe throughout the 19th century, and it was, incrementally losing territories. I mean, to continue on beyond losing the Levant to Mehmet Ali in the 1830s. I mean, the
But when
same
did they
happened.
get it back? When did they get it back? If you're saying that Mehmet Ali took over inter alia, what's today the land of Israel,
Right.
then but that's
It,
not who we fought in 1917. We
it
fought the
took it took several yeah after several decades, Turkey did reestablish itself across the Levant, but it continued contracting elsewhere. I mean, in the late 1870s, with the Treaty of Berlin in 1878, the Turks lost both Romania and Bulgaria. Right, they emerged from that empire as independent states with
I'm sorry, the Treaty of Berlin between whom and whom?
yeah, it was in a pan-European peace treaty hammered out in Berlin in 1878. Yeah, that sanctioned Turkey's loss of modern Bulgaria and Romania. Right, but yeah, and this also relates to Zionist history in the sense that there was such a large population, particularly in Romania, more so than in Bulgaria, and that Hofefe Zion caught on there very strongly. And some of the very first of the new settlements, the Moshavot, right, were settled by the Romanians in northern today's Israel.
Like Rosh Pina.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Zichron Yaakov, etc. Yeah, that was done by the Romanians.
And so the religious Zionists were saying, here's our chance to return to the land of Israel, just like the Christians reminded us that we believe in as well. And the non-religious Zionists said, here's our chance to be nationalistic, just like the Serbians and the
Mm,
Bulgarians and the Greeks and whoever else all over the world. We will establish our independence from empires like the Ottoman Empire.
yeah. Yeah, there was a special kind of romanticism among, the secular thinkers. The religious thinkers, Christian and Jewish alike, had their own reasons, obviously, for Zionism and for that whole push. But part of the nature of 19th century romanticism was that it envisioned a renewal of the greatness that was lost. I mean, the last 1600 years of European history does have this strong thread running through it. We're trying to reestablish the Roman Empire, right, which officially ended in the West at the end of the 5th century of the Common Era. So, the European Union is the most recent iteration, right, of this wish. But it concerns the Holy Roman Empire, and before that, Charlemagne's empire. Various efforts made around the year 1000 of the Common Era to unite Slavdom with the Franco-German world, etc. But in the 19th century, this what was called in Latin restitutio imperii, right, the restoration of the empire. It proceeded along the lines of Athens, Rome, Jerusalem, right? That is the three major cities, from which Europe derives its whole identity, really, right? Athens, Rome, and Jerusalem were to be restored. So once Greek was restored, the Italian Risorgimento began, and it's really fascinating that one of the leaders of the Italian Risorgimento, a guy named Benedetto Mussolino, not the fascist, right? Benedetto Mussolino in 1851 wrote a book about the restoration of Israel. He saw this as just the next step: Athens, Rome, Jerusalem. And
not from a religious perspective, but from
no,
a national, but from a European empirical perspective.
well, in this romantic vision, that's forever been haunting and motivating Europeans these last 15 centuries, of restoring the glory that was lost, right? So, but yeah, he wrote his work in 1851, and the Israel that the restored kingdom of Israel he envisioned was to be Hebrew speaking. And that's brilliant, really. I mean, Herzl himself was against the idea. The anecdote we all know is that who of us can buy a train ticket? Sorry, who can buy a train ticket in Hebrew? Well, here's this Italian guy thinking in terms of romanticism and restoration of Europe's glory. Well, no,
That's you. I have to um stop for a moment and talk about Eliezer ben Yehuda, who again, it's you just have to scratch a tiny bit to say this can't possibly be. It's not as easy as that we're led to believe in modern Israeli mythdom or myth. There was nobody knew any Hebrew. There were people who were praying in Hebrew. We didn't know what we were saying, and all of a sudden, Eliezer ben Yehuda said, "No, I'm going to write a dictionary, and I'm going to teach my son is not going to know any other language except for Hebrew." And then overnight, everybody all of a sudden he managed to convince everybody to teach to speak Hebrew, and that's it. But it couldn't possibly be that way, especially since decades before him there were newspapers in Hebrew.
of course, yeah.
And as much as it's obvious that's what happened, there's no question. I don't understand how that happened. I mean, did people speak Hebrew ever since Moses' time with unbroken? When did
Yeah, there always were, Hebrew speakers in tiny little groups, obviously, and I wouldn't detract from Eliezer ben Yehuda's place, in the history of modern Hebrew language. But I wonder, Gidon, do you know the Christian Zionist connection to ben Yehuda?
I would only guess. I would only guess
Yeah,
that Eliezer ben Yehuda lived in the center of Jerusalem, near Mea Sharim, and so he fought with the ultra orthodox. He was a modernist himself,
right.
but there might have been some Christian Zionists who lived around there also, who said, "Nah, don't worry about
It's
the
richer.
people from Mea Sharim. I'll be your friend." Is that am I right at all?
It's a much richer story. In fact, yeah, the so-called greatest Victorian writer in England was George Eliot. The woman Marianne Evans. She wrote her many books as George Eliot. But in 1876, she wrote a Zionist novel. I'm sure you know it, Daniel Deronda, right? Okay,
Only heard of it.
right. Well, but as a Christian woman, she was writing this beautiful vision of deeply respectful toward Judaism and all of its practices, towards its mystic visions and dreams of the future, right? And Daniel Deronda was a spark that lit the Jewish imagination all over Europe. She wrote the book, I repeat, it was published in 1876, initially in installments, and then as a whole, it came out at the end of 1876. But already in the next year, there were 3 Russian translations in circulation. And within a year or two, it was in German and it was in Yiddish. Hamagid, the most important Hebrew language weekly published here in Poland, up in Euk, Lik, it would be the German name, but Hamagid, run by David Gordon, was publishing installments, selected installments from Daniel Deronda. But in Eliezer ben Yehuda's diaries, he writes how it happened. He was a yeshiva student in Lithuania, and he read Daniel Deronda, and it inspired him. And he just, this is right. We've got to go back. The time's come. This is happening. That's happening historically, politically. We really do have an opportunity to go back to Israel now. And these hopes of his, Zionist hopes, were quashed at the yeshiva, and he wound up leaving. But his major inspiration was, in fact, having read, the Christian George Eliot's Zionist novel. He went from there. He went to Paris to get his education, and then went to Palestine. I think he was there by 1880, 1881.
Did you read Daniel Derova?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
So when I think of Christian Zionists writing books, it always ends up being Jesus. Was this book at all Christian?
No. Well, the book is kind of in two parts, right? The one part follows the tragic lives of Englishmen. They're in fact Christian is not even relevant to their story, right? And then on the other hand, it follows the lives of Daniel, his love interest, Miriam, etc., and their dreams that are inspired by a mystic rabbi they encounter. And but the dream becomes that of restoring Israel. And George Eliot, actually, this story connects to Poland, to say more than maybe you wished for. But there was a very famous scholar, a Jewish scholar from Poland, right? His name was Emanuel Deutsch, and he wound up at the British Library, and he was writing brilliant tracts on Judaism and also on other Middle Eastern religions. But in 1867, Deutsch wrote this brilliant tract called the Talmud. And mind you, the Talmud had a horrible opinion at this time in England.
A horrible reputation.
Yeah. At this time in England, there were the very strong missionary movement had poisoned, English minds toward, anything after the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, as Protestants and Catholics would call it. That was all some sort of a departure from true Judaism. But what Deutsch did, Emanuel Deutsch, was to show that no, in fact, this what's in the Talmud is very close to what you Christians recognize in your New Testament and so forth.
Wait a second. He was Jewish himself, Emanuel Deutsch.
Yeah. He was a practicing, believing Jew. And he wound up meeting George Eliot and inspiring her. In fact, he taught her Hebrew. She learned Hebrew. She could read the Hebrew Bible. He set her up in a course she pursued independently of reading, all the many Jewish scribes and geniuses of the last 1800 years. And that's how she produced her Daniel Deronda.
Well, my question is, why? Whose interest was it that brought conventional wisdom to think that Zionism started in 1897 or a few years before at Dreyfus?
When
you have 100 years before, and you have Daniel Derova, and
it's astounding, really, and the very terms we use kind of perpetuate the myth.
Of course.
I myself refuse to use words like proto, right? Proto-Zionism. No, there was no gravity before Newton. There was only proto-gravity. It's ridiculous. Yeah, I don't like using that term or even terms like pre-Herzlian. I use the term early, which may or may not be such a big difference. But the Zionist efforts, real efforts, organized efforts, begin essentially in the 1820s, become stronger in the 1830s. That's when Jewish activists become important. I'm thinking of Yehuda Alkalai from Serbia, right?
In the 1820s.
In the 1830s, in the 1830s, Rabbi Alkalai was publishing his first works that need to be called Zionist, after all.
And Bemet, there is a familial connection between Herzl and Alkalai. His grandfather, he was his grandfather's rabbi or something like that.
And his father's.
His father's
his father was Jacob Herzl, And yeah, both his Theodore Herzl's father and grandfather were the pupils of Rabbi Alkaline, right?
What interests me is to know and to learn this reality of history, and no less so whose interest it was to spin history differently than it really was, and why.
Yeah, I do have some ideas as to why that happened. I mean, um, just over a century ago, the standard view was pretty much the one you and I are discussing right now. The Zionism had been around forever, that it involved Catholic, Christian, Jewish cooperation, Christian, particularly of a Protestant character. And that whole partnership was stressed. I mean, the best example is the work called History of Zionism, written by Nahum Sokolov, who later became
Sokolov, Nahum Sokolov,
Sokolov.
The
Yeah,
History of Zionism.
I mean he's a Polish Jew, so I pronounced it the Polish way. But
Okay.
yeah, in 1919, I mean this man was just a titan. I mean, he was the senior diplomat for the Zionist movement at Versailles and elsewise, in terms of winning the support from the Vatican and from France for the Balfour Declaration. I mean, Sokolov, he's more important to Zionism, I would argue, than Herzl, than Weizmann. But despite all he was doing in 1919, he wound up publishing this huge work. It must be 600, 700 pages, called The History of Zionism from 1600 to 1919. How did he do it? I mean, it's the work of 10 men for 10 years, right? But anyway, that's what he was stressing, was forever this cross-pollination, this cooperation between Christians and Jews. And that vision, again, standard the 100 and some years ago, collapsed. I think it's obvious because of the Holocaust. In the early years following the Holocaust, Jewish and Israeli historians weren't about to write kindly about their relationship with Christians. I mean, right? I mean, given all that was experienced at the hands of Christians. So, in fact, it's only been over the last 20 years or so that Israeli scholars and Jewish scholars in America in particular have been incorporating, once again, like Sokolov did, the Christian and Jewish elements of what was a shared history.
Absolutely fascinating. Oh, Tom, I hope that some of the people in my audience are going to be a little, just a tiny bit as fascinated as I am with all of this. And
Good stuff.
I'll break through the third wall, or whatever it's called, and ask you, our viewers, to please ask questions and make comments, and contact me, and I'll share them with Philip. And hopefully soon we will meet again and
I look
talk
forward to
some
that,
more.
Gidon. Thanks so much for this chance to talk to you.
It's my honor. It's really exciting for me. Thank you very much.
All the best.
Good day. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.